Hey everybody, with more interesting leaders being revealed each day and all of their varying effects, I got to thinking which one's the best. So today I'm going to be making a tier list. It's still hard to say which of the decks are going to come out on top, but in this video we'll just be comparing each of the heroes' individual effects and comparing them side by side and seeing which one creates the most value. This video, it's going to be 3 parts, and today we're just going to start looking at the starter deck heroes, so the first 6 that were revealed. So, I'm going to start out with Kojo Booda from Bravos. I think that this hero is an excellent example of kind of like the standard for what a hero's effect should do. Most of these heroes seem to provide you with like 1 for each region worth of stats per turn on average, and Kojo Booda does this in the form of a 2/2/2 Booda token every other turn, so it's hitting that par value of 1 worth of stats every turn. I think that this hero power is really strong because it happens automatically. The player doesn't have to do anything special to get that token to be generated every other turn. And I also like that the stats are clumped up in every other turn because it lets you, when you do get that token, have a lot better chance at going all in and trying to push for both lanes. I think it would help a lot though for Kojo Booda if they made it so that the token was generated when you were the second player, because it's a lot easier to try and push both lanes when you get to like play the last card. And so I think that the fact that the token only spawned when you're going first kind of makes it a little hard there to push both lanes. And so while it is good, I still feel like it's just kind of that middle of the road B tier leader. And I also feel like there's not really a lot of ways to compound this effect. There's not a lot of things that interact with tokens for the Bravos right now, Bravos faction, and so I think that it doesn't really, there's not really a way you can turn that 2/2/2 into a lot more than what it just is on its own. Alright, next up is Sigismar Wingspan. Comparing it to Kojo Booda, they do seem pretty similar on the surface. This Ordis leader, instead it's going to be generating you a token with 1 worth of stats for each region every turn instead of a 2 worth of stats every other turn. But I do think that there's a lot of difference in the application because a lot of the Ordis cards naturally benefit from having a token in play. Things like Atlas and Monolith Runescribe, they're just like starting power level will be higher because you're generating this token every turn. As well as a lot of other common like power cards like Charge. You're already going to be using Charge to buff the followers you've played that turn, and so having that free token out, doing nothing different than you already would, you'll just be getting an extra 1 worth of stats for that as well. So I think that that compounding really actually will make Sigismar Wingspan be a lot stronger than Kojo Booda on average, because Kojo Booda, it's pretty much just that 2 worth of stats every other turn, but oftentimes Sigismar Wingspan is going to be 2 worth of stats every turn. And so yeah, I think that really kind of pushes it up into the A tier. I think something else that's great about both of these leaders though too is because they actually summon a follower instead of just buffing something, it can really help you conserve resources. If your opponent plays something like a permanent, you won't even have to commit a character to win a lane. And I think that, yeah, that's naturally going to be really strong and be a benefit that some of the future leaders who just buff followers that are already in play kind of can't take advantage of. Alright, the next leader I'm going to look at is Sierra and Oddball. I feel like this leader, it's pretty similar again to what we've seen so far. I think that's kind of a common theme with these starter deck leaders, is they're really trying to make them pretty comparable but have a little bit of flavor of their specific faction. Sierra and Oddball, you're going to be summoning a Brass Bug token, and it has 2 worth of stats for each of the regions, so pretty similar there to Kojo Booda. Instead of summoning it just every other turn though, Sierra and Oddball will summon the token on the turns that you play a permanent that costs 3 or more. You can tap her to summon it. And so that's something where you'd think in theory, get the effect every turn, but I think in reality, it's a lot harder to pull off. You have to build your deck around it, and I know that the card pool is going to keep expanding, but right now I feel like when I build my decks, I sometimes will not have a permanent that I want to play every turn, and even in like the best games, I feel like the most that you'll be using this ability is about 3 times a game, because afterwards, like since you only have 2 permanent slots, when you start to play like that third or fourth permanent, you can do it, and you will sometimes, but it's not really getting the same value anymore because you're discarding a permanent from play that was giving you continuing value to just get a 2/2 one time. And so because of that, I really almost wanted to put this in the C tier. I feel like though, when I get really deep into it, it's like Kojo and Booda, you're probably going to get about 4 Booda tokens a game. And so I guess even if you only get like 3 brass bugs, that's pretty close. And there is a little bit of compounding that can happen with Sierra and Oddball. With the brass bug hive, you can actually have like the token she spawns be 3/3/3 in stats. And so I feel like with the extra compounding, it kind of does make up a little bit for not maybe summoning as many tokens in a game. I also think it just really fits well into her playstyle, where when you do drop those permanents, if you totally lose tempo, you can get behind, but having her power in like that key moment to kind of keep you in the game, and also with like the flexibility to choose either lane, can often let you trade lane still even when you're playing these permanents that will give you lasting effects. So I don't know, going back and forth, I think that for now, Sierra and Oddball can probably stay in the B tier. So the next leader, Nevenka and Blotch. This was an interesting leader to try and rate, but after I got thinking about it, Anchor essentially takes your follower and lets you have it stick around for 2 turns, so you get the value twice. And the one cost effect where you put your card in the reserve, if essentially you take a follower that would have been around for 1 turn and now it's around for 0 turns. So I honestly feel like those effects pretty much perfectly cancel out. The optimal situation would be you get double value out of your card. The worst situation is you get no value, so it kind of evens out there to just be like a net 0. So then looking at the rest of her effects, the rest of the time you're just going to be getting +1 in stats for one of your followers, which is on par for most of the leaders getting that like 1 worth of stats per turn. But since it only happens like 2/3 of the time, I feel like that it's honestly a little bit weaker than some of the other characters. Also, the randomness of this card is really bringing it down too, because like when you want anchored, you might get the buff, which does nothing, or when you need the buff, even if you get anchored, which theoretically is good, it might not be what you need in the moment. So I feel like this character is just a little too unreliable, and also like the power level is like just on par most of the time. So I feel like you're not really getting any reward for having this extra randomness. There are some cards like the Lyra Bastion that theoretically can mitigate some of the randomness. You can make it so that you only have like a 1 in 36 chance of getting a 1, but even with that, the best you'll have is like a 30% chance of getting anchored, and so it still makes it so that you can't rely on getting anchored. And at that point, it's like we're having to run extra cards just to guarantee we get the 1 worth of stats, when like most of the leaders are doing this anyway. And when we add in cards for other leaders like Charge for Sigismar and Wingspan, now we're like doubling the value. So I just think the value here for Nevenka and Blotch, it just doesn't really keep up, and with like the extra randomness and things, it's gonna have to go down to the C tier. I almost even wanted to put it in D tier, but I feel like if you are a player who is okay taking on some risk, like the average value it provides you is at least worthy of C tier. Alright, so this brings us to the Muna faction with Teija Nauraa. So this card, it's pretty similar in my mind to like Sigismar and Wingspan at first. So it's giving you 1 worth of stats per turn. Instead of generating a token follower though, it just gives that buff to the first follower you play. That is a little limiting sometimes if you feel like you need to play a card from the reserve to avoid sabotage. You might not get to put the buff on the character you want, but overall though, I think this card's actually very impressive. I think that it's really easy to take the par value of 1 worth of stats and like double or even triple its value, because so many of your cards in your decks are going to have anchored or give your other cards anchors, especially like some of your main followers like Spindle Harvester, Sneezer Shroom. Those are going to have anchored naturally, and so anytime you buff one of them, you're going to get the bonus in stats 2 turns in a row, and you can keep it going with things like Muna Druid and Meditation Training. So I think that just kind of like Sigismar and Wingspan, how oftentimes you're going to take 1 worth of stats and turn it into like 2 or 3 worth of stats, you get that same exact effect for Teija Nauraa. And just like all of these other base leaders, you're going to be able to get this effect no matter what. You don't have to like jump through any hoops to be able to like earn the buff. And so because it's just like automatic and so easy to like multiply the value it gives you, I really think this leader deserves to be in the A tier. Alright, so the last leader we're going to be looking at today is Akesha Taru. It's the starter deck leader for the Izmir faction, and it definitely has one of the most interesting effects for starter deck leaders. It lets you, on the rounds where you go first, have the opportunity to use the after you effect, where once you can pass your turn without playing a card and still play cards later on. And so this is a great way to essentially let you always go second. And honestly, I feel like that effect is necessary for Izmir because so many of your cards are reactive. Things like Dorothy, Off You Go, Kraken's Wrath, you're really not going to be able to do anything with these until your opponent has committed some characters to the field. And so I think that, yeah, this effect fits really well into the Izmir faction. It is strong, but just like Kojo and Booda, since you're only getting it every other round, it does kind of need to be twice as strong as the other leaders' base effects to keep up. From my experience in playing Akesha Taru, I really feel like this effect, even though it is strong, it's not probably worthy of going to the A tier. I think that the biggest problem is even though you get to go second and react to what your opponent does, it just feels like so many times if my opponent can go wide and play enough tokens, or like if their leader's giving them like extra like 2 worth of stats per turn, even though I'm going second and seeing what my opponent does, oftentimes it's hard for like me as the Izmir player to have strong enough cards that I can still beat what they're doing. Like even like when I know everything they're gonna do for their turn, I just like look at my hand a lot of the times and I can only remove so many followers and things to usually just take like one lane. And I feel like maybe like getting to go after you and see them play one more follower can let you remove like a slightly larger threat and essentially remove like an extra like 2 or 3 stats from the board. But I don't know, it's not like totally revolutionizing the game where it's like, oh, now that I'm going second, I can always clear their full board and win both lanes. No, I just feel like it keeps up and it like enables you to play the way you want to play, but I don't think it's like significantly putting you ahead of like the other leaders or busted or anything. Alright, so with that, we've ranked the 6 faction starter deck leaders. We'll be jumping back into another video where we'll look at the other 12 leaders, but yeah, I think that these initial rankings are definitely pretty solid. If you think one of the leaders should like move up or down a peg, let me know why in the comments below. But yeah, for now, I think like the B tier leaders really just have that like kind of standard value of about like 1 worth per turn, where the A tier leaders definitely kind of have some compounding that can happen to get a lot more out of their effects. And I mean, Nevenka Blotch and C, yeah, I don't know, that consistency really isn't doing it for me. But if that's something that you think is like worthwhile for the chance of getting that like 1 in 6 anchored, yeah, let me know in the comments below, or your different reasoning. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and make sure to watch out for future videos.